Chapter 1. The thing that didn't belong. Daniel Parker had always believed that the truth of a situation revealed itself in details most people overlooked. It wasn't something he trained into himself. It had simply always been there, like a second sense. He could walk into the aftermath of a charred structure and, with enough stillness, feel where the story began. That corner was too burned. That wiring was too clean. This pattern didn't match that timeline. Fire lied. Evidence didn't. So when Mary walked into the apartment carrying 2 gift bags and a smile that lingered half a second too long, Daniel noticed. He didn't react, not at first. He simply leaned back on the couch, one hand resting against his laptop, which displayed a half-organized guest list. He watched her instead, letting the moment develop. Years of habit told him not to interrupt too early. "You're home later than usual," he said, his tone easy, observational rather than accusatory. Mary slipped off her shoes, nudging the door shut behind her with her heel. "Traffic," she replied automatically, then brightened. "And my team took me out to lunch. I texted you, you might have missed it." "I probably did," Daniel said. He believed her. There was nothing unusual about that part. She set the bags on the coffee table with an energy that pulled his attention forward. "It was kind of a pre-wedding thing," she continued, clearly pleased. "They said they had to celebrate before I stopped being Mary Towns." Daniel smiled faintly. "I don't think your last name is the main feature they're going to miss." She grinned. "Wow, what a romantic. I try to keep expectations realistic." Mary laughed, dropping onto the couch beside the bags. "They got me gifts," she said, reaching inside. "It's nothing crazy. Just, office stuff." Daniel nodded, closing his laptop and sliding it aside. He turned his body slightly toward her, giving the moment his attention. This part, the sharing, the small enthusiasm, was familiar, comfortable. She pulled out a scented candle first. "This is from Julia," she said. "She swears it reduces stress, which is funny, because she's the most stressed person I know." "Maybe she bought it for herself and panicked at checkout," Daniel offered. Mary snorted softly. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised." Next came a small box of chocolates, then a notebook with embossed lettering. Each item came with commentary, a brief story, an easy rhythm. Daniel listened, responding in small ways, letting her lead. It was all exactly what he expected. Until it wasn't. Mary reached into the second bag and pulled out a smaller, sleek black box. It didn't match the others. Daniel noticed that immediately. The packaging alone set it apart. It wasn't casual or playful. It was deliberate. "What's that?" he asked. Mary hesitated for the briefest fraction of a second, so brief most people wouldn't have caught it. Then she smiled again, brighter. "This one is kind of funny," she said. She opened the box. Daniel didn't move, but something inside him shifted. The lace was unmistakable. Soft, intricate, expensive. Not a novelty item. Not a joke. This wasn't something someone picked up on a whim between a candle and chocolates. Mary's expression turned appreciative as she lifted the fabric slightly, examining it. "It's actually really nice," she said, almost to herself. Daniel felt the pattern forming. He let the silence stretch just slightly before asking, evenly, "Who gave you that?" She glanced up, still smiling. "Jason," she said. The name landed without context. "Jason," Daniel repeated. "Yeah, he's on my team," she said, as if that explained everything. "He told me I deserved something nice." Daniel looked at the lingerie again, then at her, then back. There was a moment, small, precise, where everything aligned for him. "Mary," he said quietly, "why is your coworker buying you lingerie?" She blinked, her smile faltering. "What?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He simply held her gaze with the same steady focus he used when examining a burn pattern that didn't make sense. "Why?" he repeated. "Is a man you work with buying you something like that?" Mary let out a soft, almost incredulous laugh. "It's just a gift," she said. "What's the big deal?" The pattern sharpened. Daniel nodded once, slowly. "The big deal," he said, "is that it's not an appropriate gift." She stared at him, her confusion now genuine. "You're serious?" "Yes. It was part of the group thing," she said, her voice picking up speed. "Everyone brought something. Everyone else brought candles and chocolate," Daniel replied. She hesitated again. "It's not like that." He held her gaze. "Then what is it like?" Mary straightened slightly, her expression tightening. "Daniel, you're making this weird." "No," he said calmly. "I'm recognizing that it already is." The room shifted, not physically, but in tone. The easy warmth from earlier drained out, replaced by something sharper. She set the box down, her movements more deliberate now. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's just a gift." "It's not just a gift," Daniel replied, still steady. "And you shouldn't have accepted it." Her eyes widened. "Excuse me? You need to return it," he said. The words landed harder than his tone. Mary sat back, as if physically pushed by the suggestion. "I'm not returning it," she said. "That would be incredibly rude." Daniel exhaled quietly, not out of frustration but finality. You accepted something intimate from another man, he said. That's already a problem. Keeping it makes it worse. Her disbelief turned sharp. I can't believe you're acting like this. I'm not acting, he said. I'm being clear. She shook her head, her voice rising. You're being insecure. The word hung in the air. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply nodded once. I understand, he said. Mary's shoulders dropped slightly, as if she expected the tension to ease now that the word had been said. Didn't. Daniel stood. She frowned. Where are you going? He moved toward the door, grabbing his keys from the small table without hesitation. I'm moving out, he said. Her face went blank. What? The wedding's off, he added, just as evenly. For a second, the words didn't reach her. Then they did. Daniel, stop, what are you? But he didn't stop. He opened the door, and he walked out, leaving behind the apartment, the gifts, the plans, and Mary, sitting in the middle of a moment she had never imagined could break everything. Chapter 2. Containment. Daniel Parker did not slam doors. It was a small thing, but it mattered to him. Noise, in his experience, was often a substitute for clarity. People shouted, slammed, broke, anything to fill the space where certainty should have been. But Daniel had never needed that. When he moved, he did so with purpose, not volume. The apartment door had closed behind him with a quiet, final click. Now, standing in the hallway for half a breath longer than necessary, he let the moment settle. Not reconsidered, not questioned, simply recognized for what it was. Then he walked. Outside, the air carried the faint chill of early evening, and the city moved on as it always did, cars passing, distant conversations, the soft rhythmic hum of a world that didn't pause for personal implosions. Daniel slid into his car, started the engine, and drove. He didn't turn on the radio. There was no need. His mind was already quiet. Mary Towns remained on the couch long after the door closed, her body frozen in the exact position she'd been in when Daniel walked out. For several seconds, her brain refused to process what had just happened. It simply hovered, suspended between disbelief and denial, waiting for something to realign. Didn't. The apartment felt different. It wasn't empty. His things were still there, the laptop pushed slightly to the side, a jacket folded over the arm of a chair, but it felt absent. Like something structural had shifted that she couldn't see but could somehow feel pressing in from every angle. No, she said softly, the word finally escaping her. She grabbed her phone. Her hands trembled. Not wildly, not uncontrollably, but enough that she noticed. That detail alone unnerved her. She dialed Daniel. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. Her mouth opened, words pooling without form. For a moment, she almost laughed, because the idea of leaving a voicemail right now felt absurd. Daniel, this is ridiculous, she said anyway, her voice tighter than she intended. You don't just leave over something like this. Call me back. She hung up. The silence returned immediately, heavier now. Mary stared at the box still sitting on the coffee table. The lace peeked out just slightly where she hadn't fully closed it. She reached for it slowly, almost cautiously, as if it might react. This is insane, she muttered. But for the first time, the words didn't sound entirely certain. Daniel didn't speed. He drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else in his life, even now. Traffic parted and merged around him, but he remained steady, deliberate. His destination had already been decided before he reached the end of their street. Mary's parents' house. If he was going to end this, then he would do it cleanly. No misunderstandings. No reinterpretation later. He had always respected her parents. They had treated him with warmth, with openness, with the quiet approval that came not from pressure, but from observation. They deserved honesty. Mary's phone call to them was inevitable. He would not let it become something it wasn't. Mary paced. The apartment offered no stability, no grounding. Every room felt like it belonged to a different version of her life, the one that had existed an hour ago. She dialed again, straight to voicemail. Her jaw tightened. Fine, she said to no one. She scrolled to her mother's contact and hit call. The line picked up almost immediately. Mary? Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? Mary exhaled sharply. No, not even close. There was a pause, a shift on the other end. Her mother knew that tone. What happened? Mary's words tumbled out faster than she intended, disjointed, chasing each other. He walked out. He said he's moving out and the wedding's off, and I don't understand what just happened. Another pause. Okay, her mother said carefully. Start at the beginning. Mary stopped pacing long enough to press her fingers against her forehead. My team took me to lunch today, right? And they got me gifts. Just normal stuff, candles, chocolate, And then Jason got me this lingerie set and Daniel completely lost it. Jason? Her mother repeated. Who is Jason? A coworker, Mary said quickly. It wasn't even a big deal, it was just funny. And he told me I deserved something nice. And, Mary, her mother's voice had changed. Not harsh, not loud, but focused. Mary paused. What? Daniel walked out because of that? Yes, she said, defensive again. Because he decided to make it into something it wasn't. He told me to return it, and I said no because that would be rude, and then he called it inappropriate, and then, her mother prompted. Mary hesitated. I told him he was being insecure, she admitted. There was silence on the line. Not confused silence. Not processing silence. Just silence. Mom, I'm here, her mother said slowly. Where is he now? I don't know, Mary said. He just left. Another pause, longer this time. I want you to stay where you are, her mother said. Don't go anywhere. What? Mary frowned. Why? Because, her mother replied carefully. I think your father is about to have a conversation tonight. Daniel parked in front of the familiar house and turned off the engine. The porch light was already on. He sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, letting the transition happen. This wasn't hesitation, it was alignment. He knew what he was about to say, and once he stepped out, there would be no reason to revise it. He opened the door and got out. The walk up to the front door felt shorter than usual. He knocked. Footsteps approached almost immediately, and the door opened to reveal Mary's father, Thomas Towns, a solid, composed man whose presence carried a natural authority that didn't need to announce itself. Daniel, Thomas said, surprised. What's going on? Daniel met his eyes. Can I come in? Thomas studied him for half a second, then stepped aside. Of course. As Daniel entered, he caught sight of Mary's mother in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, her posture tense. She glanced over, her expression tightening slightly as she recognized him. The conversation had already begun. Let's go to my office, Thomas said quietly. Daniel nodded. The office door closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the house. Thomas gestured to a chair, and Daniel sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but measured. Mary just called, he said. She said you ended the engagement and walked out. Daniel nodded once. That's correct. Thomas watched him carefully. Did she tell us why? No, Daniel said. I didn't think she would. Thomas exhaled slowly. Then you should. So Daniel did. He explained it without embellishment, without accusation, without emotion bleeding into the structure. Just facts, observations, the sequence of events exactly as they occurred. When he finished, the room felt different. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression no longer surprised, but not relaxed either. Let me make sure I understand, he said slowly. A man she works with gave her lingerie, and she accepted it. Yes. And when you told her it was inappropriate, she refused to return it. Yes. And called you insecure. Yes. Thomas nodded once, looking down briefly at his desk before raising his eyes again. I see. They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice steady. She's wrong, he said plainly. Daniel didn't react outwardly, but a small shift registered. Thomas continued. But she doesn't understand why she's wrong. Not yet. Daniel considered that. I'm not interested in waiting around for her to figure it out, he said. That's fair, Thomas replied. But I'm asking you to give us a few days. Daniel's gaze sharpened slightly. Why? Because, Thomas said, she's not used to consequences that feel this real. And right now, she's still trying to frame this as something it isn't. Daniel remained silent. If she calls you tonight, Thomas added, she's going to defend herself. You already know that. Daniel did. But if we talk to her, Thomas said, there's a chance she'll actually hear something. Daniel leaned back slightly, considering. I'm not going to just pretend everything's fine if she changes her tone, he said. I wouldn't expect you to, Thomas replied. Another pause. The moment stretched just long enough to matter. Then Daniel gave a small nod. A few days, he said. Thomas nodded back. A few days, he agreed. Outside the closed office door, Mary's voice, faint, distant, strained, continued through the phone line. And for the first time since the door had closed behind Daniel Parker, the situation had moved from ignition to containment. Chapter 3. The problem with smoke. Mary did not sleep. She tried briefly. Around midnight she lay down, stared at the ceiling, closed her eyes, and willed her mind to quiet. Didn't. Every time she drifted toward something resembling rest, the scene replayed, not identically, but in fragments reshaped. Daniel's voice, calm. You need to return it. Her own voice, sharper than she remembered. You're being insecure. Then the door. Always the door. By 2 a.m, she gave up entirely and moved back to the couch, wrapping herself in a blanket she didn't need. The apartment was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, vacant quiet. She picked up the box again. It had become, somehow, the center of everything. Mary turned it over in her hands, studying it like she might find an alternate explanation hidden in the packaging. There was nothing unusual about it. Nothing that explained why something so small had escalated so dramatically. It doesn't even make sense, she muttered. And yet, the longer she stared at it, the less certain she felt about that statement. She thought back to lunch. Jason had been sitting across from her, leaning just slightly forward, his usual easy confidence intact. He had a way of talking like every moment was mildly amusing to him. When he'd handed her the gift, he hadn't looked embarrassed. Not joking, just sure. You deserve something nice, he'd said. At the time, it had sounded casual. Now, replayed in her head, it felt different. Mary frowned. No, she said firmly, aloud this time. That doesn't mean anything. She set the box down harder than intended. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it instantly, hope flaring before logic could catch up. Not Daniel. Her shoulders dropped slightly as she read her mother's message. We'll talk tomorrow. Try to get some rest. Mary stared at the words. That was it? No reassurance. No, don't worry, he's overreacting. No immediate validation of her side. Just we'll talk. Something uncomfortable settled in her chest. Daniel slept. Not deeply, not without interruption. But when he lay down on the spare bed in the guest room of his childhood home, his body did eventually yield to exhaustion. By early morning, he was awake. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling he hadn't seen regularly in years. The familiarity of it felt distant, like looking at a photograph of something that used to belong to him. There was no immediate rush of regret, no second-guessing, just a quiet, steady awareness of where things stood. He sat up, ran a hand over the back of his neck, and exhaled slowly. His phone sat on the nightstand. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, all from Mary. He picked up the phone, looked at the notifications, then set it back down without playing them. Whatever she had said last night, he already knew the shape of it. Defense, confusion, maybe anger. He wasn't interested in reacting to the first draft of her thoughts. If she had something clear to say, she'd say it later. Daniel stood, got dressed, and headed downstairs. Breakfast at his parents' house followed a routine that hadn't changed in decades. Coffee brewed before conversation. His mother glanced at him once as he entered the kitchen, then slid a mug toward his usual spot without comment. His father looked up from the newspaper just long enough to acknowledge him with a brief nod. No one asked why he was there. They didn't need to. Daniel sat, took a sip of coffee, and let the quiet settle. After a few minutes, his father folded the paper neatly and set it aside. You look like you slept, he said. I did. Good. That was the extent of it. His mother, however, was less inclined toward minimalism. I assume this has something to do with Mary, she said, not looking up as she stirred something at the stove. It does, Daniel replied. She turned slightly, studying him now. Are we in the temporary cooling off phase or the definitive ending phase? Daniel considered the question. The second one, he said. His mother raised an eyebrow, but didn't challenge it immediately. That's a firm conclusion for one argument. It wasn't about the argument, Daniel said. His father leaned back slightly, watching him with a more focused interest now. Then what was it about? He asked. Daniel rested his forearms lightly on the table. A disconnect, he said. In judgment, in boundaries, in how we interpret situations. That sounds clinical, his mother said. It is, Daniel replied. She gave a small huff of amusement at that, despite herself. Most people would call that a disagreement. Most people don't walk into burned-out buildings and reconstruct failure patterns for a living, Daniel said. That earned him a brief smile from his father. Fair point, he said. His mother crossed her arms lightly. You're comparing your relationship to a fire investigation? I'm saying the principle is the same, Daniel replied calmly. Something happens that shouldn't happen. You figure out why. And you decide if it's preventable or inevitable. And you've decided this was inevitable? She pressed. I've decided, Daniel said, that the way she responded mattered more than what happened. His father nodded slightly, as if that tracked. His mother, however, tilted her head. Meaning, she didn't see a problem, Daniel said. When I pointed it out, she didn't reconsider. She dismissed it. Then she reframed it as my issue. His mother's expression shifted. Less probing now, more thoughtful. And that tells you? That we're not aligned on something fundamental, Daniel said. There was a pause. Then his father spoke again. Her father called me last night. Daniel glanced up. Figured he might, he said. He asked for a few days, his father continued. Said they're going to talk to her. I agreed, Daniel said. To wait, not to change my mind. His mother nodded slowly. Fair distinction. She turned back to the stove, then added almost casually, You're very certain. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his coffee, then back up. I usually am, he said. Mary arrived at her parents' house just before noon. She hadn't planned to go so early, but sitting alone in the apartment had become unbearable. Every object felt like it belonged to a version of her life that no longer existed. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. Come in, she said, her tone neutral but not cold. Mary stepped inside, scanning the space instinctively, as if something invisible might be different here too. Her father stood in the living room, arms loosely crossed. Hi, she said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Hi, he replied. No one hugged her. That, more than anything, made her stomach drop. Sit, her mother said gently, gesturing to the couch. Mary sat. Her parents took the chairs opposite her. The symmetry of it, 3 people facing each other, no distractions, felt deliberate. Her father spoke first. Daniel was here last night. Mary swallowed. I figured. He explained what happened. He continued. Mary nodded quickly. Then you know he overreacted. Her parents didn't respond. That silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Mary shifted slightly. Right? Her father leaned forward. No, he said simply. The word hit harder than she expected. Mary blinked. What? He didn't overreact, her father said. He reacted quickly. There's a difference. That doesn't even make sense, Mary said, a hint of frustration breaking through. It was just a gift, her mother cut in gently. Mary stopped. Her mother's voice remained calm, but there was something firmer underneath it now. Before you explain it again, she said, I want you to answer one question honestly. Mary hesitated, then nodded. If Daniel brought home lingerie, her mother said, and told you a woman at work bought it for him because he deserved something nice, what would you think? Mary opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. For the first time since the argument, a crack appeared. Not wide, not dramatic, but enough for something new to enter. And once it did, everything that had seemed so obvious the night before started to blur, just slightly. Chapter 4. Pattern Recognition. Daniel returned to work on Monday as if nothing had happened. That, more than anything, surprised him. He'd expected some kind of residual disruption, something misaligned internally, pulling his focus away from routine. But when he stepped into the familiar environment of the fire station, the structure of his work absorbed him almost immediately. Reports, case files, the subtle, meditative process of reconstructing damage. Fire at least made sense. Morning, his chief called from across the office, not looking up from a stack of paperwork. Morning, Daniel replied, setting his bag down. There was no immediate follow-up question. His chief, Robert Hayes, was not a man who believed in unnecessary conversation. He had an uncanny ability to notice everything without announcing it, which was part of why Daniel respected him. Daniel took his seat and opened a file from a case he'd been working the previous week. A residential fire. Minor structural damage, no casualties. Electrical origin was the likely cause, but something about the burn pattern had been slightly off. Now, looking at the photos again, it came back into focus. It didn't start where they thought, Daniel said aloud, almost to himself. His chief glanced up this time. No. Daniel turned the file slightly, pointing to an image. They assumed the outlet, but the spread doesn't line up. The heat concentration is shifted. It started higher. Hayes stood, walked over, and studied the image without speaking. A moment passed. Then he nodded. Fault in the wiring above the fixture, he said. Yeah. They stood there for a second longer, 2 men quietly agreeing on something unseen by most people. Then Hayes looked at him, not at the file, at him. You're early today, he said. Daniel shrugged lightly. Couldn't sleep much. That's so. It wasn't a question. Hayes returned to his desk but didn't sit immediately. You're not distracted, he added. No. Interesting. Daniel flipped another page in the report. Why? Hayes leaned back against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. Most people would be. Daniel paused. Then he set the file down slowly. You heard, he said. Hayes gave a small, humorless smile. Your life doesn't exist in a vacuum, Parker. Daniel nodded once. That tracked. She accept something she shouldn't have? Hayes asked. It wasn't idle curiosity. It was analysis. Yes. And when you told her that, she disagreed. Yes. Hayes nodded, unsurprised. And you ended it. Yes. A small silence settled between them. Then Hayes said, You always move that fast? Daniel considered the question. When it's clear, he said. And it was clear? Yes. Hayes studied him for a long moment, not judging, not approving, just observing. All right, he said finally. Then let me ask you something. Daniel waited. When you investigate a fire, Hayes continued, do you ever call it before you've walked the whole structure? Daniel didn't hesitate. No. Why not? Because initial patterns can be misleading. Hayes nodded. Exactly. Daniel held his gaze. This wasn't misleading, he said. Maybe not, Hayes allowed. But you didn't stay to confirm that. Daniel's jaw shifted slightly, not defensively, but thoughtfully. I didn't need to, he said. Because you saw enough. Yes. Hayes nodded again, as if accepting that answer on the surface. All right, he said, pushing off the desk. Just remember, sometimes what starts the fire isn't the only thing that matters. He picked up his paperwork and moved on, conversation closed. But the statement remained. Daniel didn't respond to it immediately. He picked up the file again, flipped through the images, but his focus had shifted. Not gone, just redirected slightly. Patterns, initial assumptions, full structure. He exhaled slowly, then returned to work. Mary had never been more aware of time passing. Every hour felt like it held more weight than usual, as if something was supposed to happen inside it and simply wasn't. She sat in her parents' living room, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling in her hands, staring at a point just beyond the window without actually seeing anything. Her parents had given her space after their conversation earlier. Too much space. She'd expected follow-up lectures, instructions, maybe even a plan. Instead, her mother had simply said, "Think about it," and left her alone, which, it turned out, was significantly worse. Mary exhaled sharply, pushing herself off the couch. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, pacing again. She grabbed her phone and scrolled to Daniel's name. Still no response. Her thumb hovered over the call button, then dropped. What would she even say? "Hi, I've been thinking and I still don't fully get why this is happening, but I also don't like that I don't get it anymore, so can we, what? Restart?" She groaned softly, pressing her fingers against her temples. "This is not my fault," she said, but the sentence lacked conviction, and that bothered her more than anything. By late afternoon, Mary found herself doing something she hadn't planned. She went to work. It wasn't a scheduled day. She'd taken time off for wedding planning, but the idea of sitting still any longer had become unbearable. The office welcomed her back with its usual rhythm. Keyboards, quiet conversations, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Familiar, predictable, normal. "Mary," Julia's voice cut through her thoughts as she approached her desk. "You're back. How was the weekend?" Mary attempted a smile. "Eventful." Julia laughed. "That sounds promising." "Didn't." Mary barely had time to sit down before another voice joined in. Well, Jason said, leaning casually against the edge of her desk. "Didn't expect to see you here today." She froze, for just a second. Then she turned to face him. "Yeah," she said carefully. Plans changed. His smile remained effortless, as always. "Happens." Her eyes flicked to him briefly, really looking at him this time. The way he stood, the way he watched her. Too comfortable. "About the gift," she said. His grin widened slightly. "You liked it." Mary hesitated. A day ago, the question would have been harmless. Now it felt loaded. "It was unexpected," she said finally. "That's the point of a good gift," Jason replied easily. There it was again. That confidence. Not playful. Assured. Mary's stomach tightened. "Why did you get it?" she asked. Jason shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Because I wanted to." "That's not an answer." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Sure it is," he said. Something about his tone, too smooth, too certain, made the last pieces fall into place. "Not all at once, but enough." Mary straightened slowly. "You knew I was engaged," she said. "Yeah. And you still thought that was appropriate." Jason didn't flinch. "I thought you deserved something better than candles." The words landed with a quiet weight. Mary stared at him. For the first time since the argument, something inside her aligned. Not defensively, not reactively, but clearly. Not about Daniel. Not about the argument. About this moment, this intention. And suddenly, for the first time, Daniel's reaction didn't feel exaggerated. It felt predictable. Jason pushed off the desk, still relaxed. "Don't overthink it," he added. "It's just a gift." Mary let out a slow breath. "No," she said quietly. He paused. She met his eyes fully now. "It's not." Chapter 5. The Shape of Intent. Mary left work early. This time, it wasn't out of confusion. It was because something had become clear, and staying any longer would have been dishonest. The conversations around her, the easy jokes, the normal rhythm of the day, all of it felt misaligned with what she now understood. She walked to her car slowly, but her mind moved with a steady, deliberate pace. He wasn't joking. That was the part she couldn't avoid anymore. Jason hadn't stumbled into something inappropriate. He hadn't misjudged a harmless gesture. He had chosen that gift, delivered it without hesitation, and watched her receive it without consequence. And she had accepted it. Mary unlocked her car and sat inside, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The quiet of the enclosed space gave her just enough room to let the realization settle fully. If Daniel had done that, she murmured. The image came easily now, and this time she didn't push it away. Daniel standing in the living room, calm, matter of fact. "A woman from work gave me this." The explanation, the tone. She said I deserved something nice. Mary's jaw tightened. She would not have laughed. She would not have brushed it off. She would not have accepted his explanation without question. And she certainly wouldn't have told him he was being insecure if he objected. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "No," she said quietly. Not defensive, not dismissive, just correcting herself. She started the car. Daniel remained at the station later than necessary. The work in front of him was already complete. Reports finalized, findings documented, conclusions supported. There was no real reason to stay. But leaving meant opening space, and space meant conversation. He leaned back in his chair, the dim light of the office settling into the quiet after hours. The hum of the building softened as people filtered out, one by one, until only the essentials remained. His phone sat on the desk, silent. For a moment, He considered what would happen when it rang again. He already knew the structure. Mary would explain, clarify, maybe even apologize, but explanations didn't rewrite earlier positions. That was the part most people misunderstood. Daniel didn't act quickly because he lacked thought. He acted quickly because, by the time most people started arguing, he had already finished thinking. He exhaled slowly and reached for his coat. Then his phone vibrated. He looked down. Mary. He let it ring twice before answering. Hello. Mary closed her eyes briefly when she heard his voice. Still steady. Still composed. That hadn't changed. Hi, she said. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable but not familiar either. I'm not calling to argue, she added. Okay, Daniel replied. No edge. No invitation. Mary leaned lightly against the kitchen counter, grounding herself. I saw him today, she said. Jason, Daniel said. Yes. He didn't ask anything further. Mary swallowed, forcing herself to continue without circling or softening. He wasn't joking, she said. I didn't see that before. I should have. There was a small pause. I didn't think he was, Daniel said. I know, Mary replied. You didn't miss it. Another quiet moment followed. Mary took a breath. I didn't question it at the time, she said. And I should have. That part, that's on me. Daniel said nothing. I also shouldn't have called you insecure, she continued. That was wrong. There it was. Clear. Direct. Without layers. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, absorbing the words. When he spoke, his tone hadn't changed, but something in it had sharpened. You meant it when you said it, he said. Mary blinked. I thought I did. You did, he replied calmly. You believed it enough to say it without hesitation. There was no accusation in his voice, but there was precision. Mary exhaled slowly. That doesn't make it right. No, Daniel said. It doesn't. Silence settled again. Careful. Measured. Mary hesitated, then stepped forward into the part she had been turning over since leaving work. I think we both. No, Daniel interrupted. It was the first time he had cut her off. Not loudly, but cleanly. Mary froze slightly. What? We're not doing that, he said. Doing what? Sharing blame to make it easier to resolve, Daniel replied. The words were steady, controlled, but firm enough to stop her momentum entirely. Mary felt that land. I wasn't trying to. You were, he said, not harshly. Maybe not intentionally, but that's where that sentence goes. She fell silent. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. I left, he said. That's true. Mary nodded faintly, even though he couldn't see it. But I didn't leave in the middle of confusion, he continued. I left after you made your position clear. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. You said it was just a gift, he went on. You said you weren't returning it. And when I explained why that was a problem, you didn't reconsider. You dismissed it and told me the issue was mine. Mary closed her eyes. Hearing it structured like that removed any room to hide inside interpretation. Daniel continued just as evenly. That's the point where I knew where you stood, he said. So I acted on it. Mary drew a slow breath. I didn't understand it properly, she said. I agree, Daniel replied. The lack of hesitation in his answer hit harder than if he had softened it. She swallowed. And if I had. But you didn't, he said. Again, not interrupting to shut her down. Interrupting to keep the focus exact. Not hypothetical. Not revised. Real. Mary opened her eyes, staring at the counter in front of her. I see it now, she said quietly. I believe you, Daniel replied. She looked up slightly. You do. Yes. That surprised her. But then he continued. That doesn't change when you saw it, he added. And there it was. The line that separated acknowledgement from resolution. Mary nodded slowly, more to herself than to him. I'm not trying to pretend it didn't happen, she said. Good, Daniel replied. Another silence. Not empty, but heavier now because it held truth without cushioning. Mary let out a slow breath. I didn't realize what I was accepting, she said. I know, Daniel said. She hesitated. And you didn't stay to see if I could realize it. That time he didn't interrupt immediately. But when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet finality. I stayed long enough, he said, to hear your answer. Mary's chest tightened slightly. That wasn't the end of the conversation, she said. It was enough of one, Daniel replied. The words weren't dismissive. They were decisive. Mary leaned back against the counter, her grip on the phone loosening just slightly. For the first time since she had dialed, she felt the full weight of the gap between them. Not just in what had happened, but in how they processed it. Not emotion, structure, timing, certainty. I'm trying to understand it now, she said. I can hear that, Daniel replied. That at least was something. Small, but real. Neither of them spoke for a long moment after that. Because there was nothing left to soften the truth with. Only the shape of it. Clear, defined, and, for the first time, fully visible to both of them. Chapter 6. What lingers? Daniel didn't call her back after they hung up. That wasn't unusual for him. He had never been someone who filled silence just to make it less uncomfortable. If something had been said, then it had been said. There was no instinct in him to immediately reopen the discussion, soften the edges, or rework the conversation into something easier to hold. So he finished his evening the same way he would have if the call had never happened. He went home. He ate something simple. He sat in the quiet. But the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It had weight now. Not confusion. He wasn't questioning why he'd left, or whether he'd misread the situation. That part remained as solid as it had been from the beginning. Mary had accepted something she shouldn't have. She had defended it. She had redirected the issue toward him. That hadn't changed. But now there was something else layered into it, a second point of reference. She saw it now. Too late, maybe, but clearly. Daniel leaned back against his couch, one arm resting along the back, staring at nothing in particular. His mind wasn't racing, but it wasn't still either. It moved in slow, deliberate passes, reevaluating not his decision, but the structure around it. Timing. That was the part his chief's voice echoed back into place. Do you ever call it before you've walked the whole structure? Daniel exhaled through his nose, his jaw shifting slightly. I did walk it, he said aloud quietly. But even as he said it, he knew what the counterpoint would be. He had walked it as far as her response allowed. And then he stopped. He picked up his phone not to call, just to look at it. A habit more than intent. No new messages. He set it back down again. Whatever came next wouldn't happen quickly. That much, at least, was clear. Mary didn't try to call again that night. That was deliberate. The earlier conversation had taken more out of her than she expected. Not emotionally in the dramatic sense, but structurally. She had gone into it thinking she needed to explain something. Instead, she'd been forced to define it. And Daniel hadn't let anything blur. She sat at the kitchen table, elbows resting lightly against the surface, staring at her phone. I wasn't trying to share blame, she murmured to herself. And yet, his response had landed because it wasn't entirely wrong. She had been reaching for something that softened the space between them. Not shifting responsibility, not intentionally, but balancing it, making it less absolute. Daniel didn't operate like that. He never had. That realization settled slowly, but firmly. Mary leaned back in her chair, exhaling. I made it clear, she said quietly. That was the part she hadn't wanted to look at before. Not just what she accepted, but how quickly she dismissed the objection. She had been certain, confident, just like Jason had been. The parallel made her stomach tighten. Great, she muttered. That's not comforting. She stood, restless, and walked into the living room. The box was still on the coffee table, untouched, unmoved. It didn't feel like an object anymore. It felt like a marker, a fixed point that everything had built around. Mary stared at it, then walked over, picked it up, and carried it to the trash. She hesitated for half a second, then dropped it in. The sound it made wasn't dramatic, just soft contact against the inside of the bin. But the act itself wasn't small. Mary stepped back, folding her arms loosely. That's done, she said. It didn't fix anything, but it wasn't nothing. The next morning came quietly. Daniel arrived at the station on time as always, but his chief was already there, earlier than usual, standing near the open bay doors with a cup of coffee in hand. You look like you did some thinking, Hayes said without preamble. Daniel stopped beside him, glancing out into the street beyond. I did, he admitted. And Daniel took a moment before answering. She understands it now, he said. At least that part. Hayes nodded slightly. And does that change anything? Daniel didn't answer immediately. That, in itself, was an answer. Not the facts, he said eventually. No, Hayes agreed. Facts tend to stay put. Daniel shifted his weight slightly. But it changes the context, he added. Hayes glanced at him, just briefly. Context matters. It does, Daniel said. Another pause stretched between them, easy, unforced. Then Hayes took a sip of his coffee. You still standing where you were? Daniel looked forward again, his expression steady. I'm standing where I stopped, he said. Hayes let out a small breath that might have been amusement. Fair enough, he said. Just don't confuse stopping with finishing. Daniel didn't respond to that. But he didn't dismiss it either. Mary returned to her parents' house that afternoon. She didn't call ahead this time. She didn't need to. Her mother opened the door and studied her for a moment before stepping aside. You threw it away, she said, not as a question. Mary nodded. Yes. Her father looked up from his chair in the living room. Before or after you talked to him? After, Mary said. He nodded once as if that mattered. Probably did. Mary stepped inside, quieter than she had been the day before. Not weighed down, just more precise. I talked to him, she added. Her mother gestured toward the couch. Sit. Mary did. Her parents took their usual places across from her again. But the tone had shifted. Not confrontational anymore. Not instructional. Observational. Well? Her father prompted. Mary folded her hands loosely in her lap. He didn't argue, she said. He didn't get angry. He just kept everything exactly where it was. Her mother tilted her head slightly. Meaning, he didn't let me blur it, Mary replied. At all. Her father's mouth twitched faintly. That sounds like him. Mary exhaled softly. I tried to balance it, she admitted. Not on purpose, but I could hear it when he pointed it out. And? Her mother asked. Mary shook her head slightly. He shut it down. Not harshly. Just completely. Silence followed that. Then her father spoke. Good. Mary blinked. Good. Yes, he said. Because if he hadn't, you'd still be standing halfway between understanding it and avoiding it. Mary frowned slightly, but didn't argue. Because he wasn't wrong. Her mother leaned forward slightly, her expression gentler now. Do you understand why he left? She asked. Mary didn't answer immediately. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. Not completely. Not easily. But enough. And for the first time since everything fractured, that single word didn't feel like resistance. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't reached yet. Something that, whether she liked it or not, she was going to have to face fully. Because Daniel Parker wasn't someone who circled back into uncertainty. He stayed where he stopped. And if she wanted any chance of meeting him there, she would have to get there honestly. Chapter 7. Where it holds, Daniel didn't expect to see her that week. That assumption wasn't based on avoidance, it was based on pattern. Mary, for all her recent clarity, still needed time to move through something fully. She wasn't someone who arrived at conclusions quickly, and when she did, she tended to circle them, refine them, test them against different angles. So when he stepped out of the station late Wednesday afternoon and saw her leaning against the passenger side of his car, it interrupted that expectation cleanly. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't on her phone. She was just waiting. Daniel stopped a few steps short, taking in the image without reacting immediately. Her posture was composed, but not casual. There was intention in the way she held herself, like she'd thought carefully about being there and had chosen it anyway. After a moment, he closed the distance. Mary. She straightened slightly at the sound of his voice, meeting his gaze without hesitation. Hi, she said. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't overly confident either. It was level. Daniel nodded once. You waited. Yes. He glanced briefly at the car, then back to her. How long? Long enough, she said. There was a trace of dryness in that, almost humor, but it didn't linger. Daniel considered her for a moment. All right, he said. What do you need to say? Mary didn't rush into it. That, in itself, was new. I needed to talk to you in person, she said. That's not the same as needing to talk, he replied. She gave a faint nod. No, it's not. He waited. Mary exhaled slowly, grounding herself before she continued. I'm not here to ask you to come back, she said. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased slightly. Not softer, just less braced. Okay, he said. I'm here because I understand what happened, she added. You said that on the phone. I said I saw part of it, she corrected quietly. This is the rest. That held his attention more fully. Go ahead, he said. Mary glanced briefly toward the street, as if organizing the thought in her head one last time before committing to it. I didn't just misunderstand the situation, she said. I misjudged the boundary. Daniel said nothing. I treated it like it didn't matter, she continued. And when you pointed out that it did, I didn't question myself. I questioned you. Her voice remained steady, but there was no softness in it now, no cushioning. And that's the part that matters most, she said. Daniel watched her closely. You didn't dismiss it because you didn't understand, he said. You dismissed it because you didn't think it applied. Mary held his gaze. Yes. The directness of the answer hung between them. Daniel nodded slightly, more to himself than to her. That tracks, he said. Mary didn't look away. I also know something else now, she added. You didn't leave because of the gift. Daniel's eyes shifted slightly. No? He asked. No, she said. You left because of what happened after. That landed closer. He didn't confirm it immediately. He didn't deny it either. Mary continued before he needed to respond. If I had stopped and actually listened, if I had even considered what you were saying instead of pushing against it, you wouldn't have walked out in that moment. Daniel tilted his head just slightly. That's possible, he said. Not possible, Mary said quietly. Likely. He didn't argue the distinction. Silence settled between them. Not tense, not empty, just present. Then Mary reached into her bag. Daniel's attention sharpened slightly as she pulled out the box. The same one. For a brief second, something colder moved under his composure. Not anger, but recognition. The object still carried weight. Mary held it between them for a moment, then spoke. I didn't return it, she said. Daniel's jaw shifted slightly. I threw it away. He looked at the box again, then back at her. Why bring it here? He asked. Because it mattered, she said. Not the object, what it represented. She stepped forward and placed it carefully on the hood of his car between them. I didn't understand that when I accepted it, she continued. I do now. Daniel didn't touch the box. He didn't need to. I'm not showing it to you to prove anything, she said. I already decided what it was worth. He glanced at it once more, then back at her. And, he asked. Mary's expression didn't waver. It wasn't worth keeping, she said. Simple. Unadorned. True. Daniel let out a slow breath, his gaze settling somewhere between her and the object. The moment stretched, not because it needed resolution but because it carried enough weight to hold stillness. Finally, he spoke. You're not wrong, he said. Mary didn't move. But you're also not fixing what happened, he continued. I know, she said, and she did. This isn't about fixing, she added. It's about not avoiding it anymore. Daniel studied her again, more carefully this time. Not just what she was saying, but how she was standing there, how she held the space without rushing him to respond. You're different right now, he said. Mary gave a small, almost humorless breath. I should hope so. That almost earned something like a faint smile from him, but it didn't quite form. You said on the phone that I didn't stay long enough, Daniel said. I did, she replied. And now? Mary met his gaze directly. Now I understand why you didn't. The answer came without hesitation. That mattered. Daniel nodded once. That's accurate, he said. Another pause. Then Mary did something unexpected. She stepped back. Not retreating. Making space. I'm not asking you to decide anything today, she said. Or this week. Or at all, really. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Daniel asked. Mary glanced once more at the box resting between them. Then back at him. It's me standing where you stopped, she said. Daniel held her gaze. No immediate answer came. But something about that statement settled differently than the rest. Not insistence. Not negotiation. Position. Aligned not in agreement, not in resolution, but in place. The place he had been standing the night he walked out. The place she hadn't understood then, but did now. A car passed on the street behind them, breaking the stillness for a moment before it faded again. Daniel reached forward. Not toward her. Toward the box. He picked it up, weighed it slightly in his hand, then walked a few steps to the nearby trash bin at the edge of the lot, and dropped it in. He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression hadn't softened, but it had shifted. Not resolved. Not decided. But open in a way it hadn't been before. Mary didn't move toward him. She didn't need to. For now, this standing in the same place without pretending it wasn't broken was enough. Not the end. But no longer the point where everything had stopped. Chapter 8. After the turn, the distance between standing in the same place and moving forward turned out to be subtle. That was the part neither of them had expected. Daniel didn't wake up the next morning with clarity. Mary didn't wake up with certainty. Nothing resolved overnight. Not in their minds, not in the space between them. But something had shifted. The line that had been drawn so cleanly the night he walked out was no longer a wall. It was a position. And now they both understood exactly where it was. Daniel arrived at the station earlier than usual the next morning. Not because he needed to, because he didn't feel like staying still at home. He moved through the building in quiet familiarity, the routine anchoring him as it always had. Coffee, files, the low, steady rhythm of work beginning again. His chief was already there as expected. You look like you didn't sleep much, Hayes said without looking up. I slept, Daniel replied. Not the same thing, Hayes said. Daniel didn't argue. He set his bag down, then paused for a moment, long enough that Hayes glanced up. Well, Hayes said. Daniel considered how to answer. She came by yesterday, he said. Hayes leaned back slightly, interested now. And she understands it, Daniel said. Hayes nodded once. And you believe that? Yes. There was no hesitation in the answer. That alone shifted something in the conversation. And what does that change? Hayes asked. Daniel took a breath. It means I wasn't wrong about what happened, he said. But it also means that wasn't the limit of it. Hayes studied him quietly. That's new, he remarked. Daniel gave a slight nod. Yeah. Doesn't mean you were wrong to leave, Hayes added. I know. But it might mean leaving wasn't the final step. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the file in his hand, then set it aside. I don't make decisions halfway through something, he said. No, Hayes agreed. You don't. A small pause followed. But, Hayes continued, sometimes what you think is the end of something is just where you stopped looking at it. Daniel exhaled slowly. He didn't push back. That, more than anything, told Hayes the conversation had landed where it needed to. Mary didn't go to work that morning. Instead, she stayed at the apartment. Not pacing. Not trying to distract herself. Just present. The space felt different now, not empty, not heavy. Just quiet in a way that didn't demand reaction. She had cleaned the kitchen. Put things back where they belonged. Thrown away anything that felt like it belonged to the version of her that had brushed everything off so casually. It wasn't symbolic in the dramatic sense. It was practical. She was removing clutter not just physically but mentally. Mary stood in the center of the living room, looking around. "This is where it broke," she said softly. And for the first time, that didn't feel like an accusation. Just a fact. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Daniel." She answered immediately. "Hi." "Hi," he said. His tone hadn't changed. But it wasn't distant either. Just open. "I wanted to talk," he said. "So did I," Mary replied. That earned the smallest pause. "All right," Daniel said. "Then say what you need to say." Mary leaned against the back of the couch, steadying herself. "I'm not confused anymore," she said. "I know. I'm not defensive anymore either. I can hear that." She exhaled slowly. "I don't expect you to trust that immediately." "That's correct," Daniel said. Again, no hesitation. Mary almost smiled. Consistency was, if nothing else, something she could rely on. "But I'm not trying to undo what happened," she continued. "I'm trying to make sure I don't repeat it." That held his attention. Silence followed, not empty, just thoughtful. "And?" he prompted. Mary tilted her head slightly, thinking through her own answer even as she spoke. "I didn't just miss that situation," she said. "I missed what it said about how I was handling attention, boundaries, people in general." Daniel remained quiet. "I don't like that," she added. "That makes sense," he said. Mary let out a quiet breath. "And I don't want to be someone who has to learn that twice." Another pause. Daniel shifted slightly where he stood, leaning against the wall of the station near the bay doors. "That matters," he said. Mary closed her eyes briefly at that. It wasn't approval. But it wasn't dismissal either. "Where are you?" she asked. "At work." "Of course you are." That finally earned the faintest trace of something like humor in his tone. "Where are you?" "Home," she said. "Cleaning up the aftermath of my brilliant decision-making." That's one way to frame it. It's an accurate one. Daniel didn't argue that. They both fell quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I've been thinking about something," he said. Mary waited. "When I left," he continued, "I wasn't unsure." "I know. I'm still not," he added. Mary straightened slightly, not bracing, just preparing. "But I also know something else now," he said. "What?" "That the situation didn't end in that moment," Daniel replied. "That's just where I stopped." Mary absorbed that slowly. "And now?" she asked. Daniel looked out through the open bay doors, the street beyond steady and unchanged. "Now I'm looking at what comes after that," he said. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. "And what do you see?" she asked. There was no immediate answer, because for the first time Daniel Parker didn't already have one. Finally, he exhaled. "I see that you understand something now that you didn't then," he said. Mary didn't interrupt. "I see that you didn't get there quickly," he continued. "Which matters." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "And I see that if I had stayed," he said, "I would have been waiting for that." Mary's chest tightened slightly. "But you didn't," she said. "No." The word was steady. "Not regretful. Not defensive." "True. And I needed you to not stay," she said quietly. That made him pause. "Explain that," Daniel said. Mary took a breath. "If you had stayed and argued with me long enough until I got there," she said, "it wouldn't have been the same." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. "I would have been agreeing with you," she continued, "but I wouldn't have understood it on my own." The thought settled between them, carefully, deliberately. Daniel didn't reject it. He didn't accept it immediately either. He considered it. "You're saying leaving forced the outcome," he said. "I'm saying it made the outcome real," Mary replied. Another pause, long enough to matter. Then Daniel nodded, to himself more than to her. "That tracks," he admitted. Mary exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the argument, something in her chest loosened. Not relief, not resolution, just alignment. They met later that evening. Not planned, beyond a time and a place. A small park halfway between their two routines. Neutral ground. Mary arrived first this time. She stood near the edge of the path, hands loosely folded, watching the occasional passerby without focusing on any of them. When Daniel approached, she turned before he spoke. They stood facing each other. No distance this time, but no assumption of closeness either. Just equal ground. Daniel broke the silence. "You look different," he said. Mary let out a faint breath. "I feel different." "I believe you," he said. They stood there for a moment longer. Then Mary spoke. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I," Daniel replied. That honesty was new, for both of them. Mary nodded slowly. "But I know what doesn't happen," she added. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What's that?" "We don't go back to where we were before and pretend this didn't happen," she said. "Agreed. And we don't rush forward just because it's uncomfortable to sit here," she continued. "Also agreed." A small silence followed. Then Daniel spoke again. "I don't walk back into something I already walked out of," he said. "I wouldn't ask you to," Mary replied. Another pause. Steady. Calm. Intentional. And then, for the first time, Daniel stepped forward. Not closing the space entirely, but enough to change it. Mary didn't move. She let him, because this time, neither of them was rushing to define what that step meant. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't even a promise. It was something simpler. They were no longer standing where everything had ended. They were standing where something might begin again, not rebuilt from what they thought they had, but from what they both now understood.